The storm came when Lydia Moore had nowhere left to run. The Wyoming wind tore across the prairie as if it meant to rip apart anything in its path. Rain lashed her face, sharp and cold, leaving no room for thought beyond a single breath. Lydia bent low over the horse's neck, her skirt wrapped tight around her thighs, numb hands clamped on the reins. She did not dare look back, but she knew someone was behind her. Harlan Beckett was not used to being refused. He was the man her father had agreed to for her, trading her future to erase a debt that could never truly be paid. Lydia had heard enough false promises, endured enough possessive stares, enough sweet words laid over a hard truth. She was collateral. The horse slipped in a stretch of deep mud. Everything happened too fast. A panicked scream, a violent lurch, and Lydia was thrown from the saddle. Her back hit the ground first, the breath knocked clean from her lungs. A sharp pain shot through her ankle, forcing a cry from her throat. Rain poured into her mouth, her eyes, every open edge of fear. She tried to stand. She could not. Mud dragged her leg down. The storm roared overhead, mocking. Lydia lay staring up at the sky, thinking quickly that this might be how it ended. No one hearing, no one arriving in time. Then came the sound of hooves, not the familiar rhythm of pursuit. These were slower, heavier, intentional. A large horse stopped in front of her. Lydia blinked through rain mixed with tears, trying to see the man in the saddle. Lightning split the sky, revealing a hard, quiet face, deep gray eyes looking down at her without haste. He could have ridden on. Lydia understood that at once. This man owed her nothing. He was not the one chasing her. He had no reason to interfere. "I don't have any money," she said, her voice breaking with cold. "And I don't need saving." He did not answer. He dismounted and stepped closer. When he bent down, Lydia noticed his hands, large, steady, stopping just short of touching her. His gaze moved over her swollen ankle, the fresh bruises circling her wrist. A moment, brief but decisive. "I'm running," Lydia said, unsure why she trusted him with the truth. "If you don't want trouble, you should go." He studied her for another second, then spoke, his voice low and even, almost without feeling. "What's your name?" "Lydia." "Caleb." He asked nothing more, made no demands. He bent, wrapped his arms around her, and lifted her with ease. Lydia instinctively clutched his coat. When her body pressed against his chest, they both paused, not from intimacy, but from the sudden closeness of two strangers bound by circumstance. Caleb set her on the saddle, tightened the reins, then mounted behind her. Her back rested against his chest, unexpectedly warm in the cold rain. "If anyone asks," he said near her ear, "you do exactly as I say." She nodded, not asking why. The transfer station emerged through the rain. Under the awning, a lawman sheltering from the storm looked up as they approached. A lantern's light fell hard on Lydia's face. "Who's that woman?" he asked. Caleb did not look at her. His hand settled firmly at her waist. "My wife." The air seemed to stop. "Papers?" the lawman pressed. Caleb drew a quiet breath. "Married in Montana, during a storm. No time for documents." The lantern turned to Lydia. "You confirm that?" Lydia lifted her head. Her eyes met Caleb's for a split second. She understood exactly what this was. A lie. But it was the only door still open. "Yes," she said. "My husband." The lawman studied them a moment longer, then stepped aside. "Go inside. No one should be out in this tonight." When the door closed behind them, Lydia realized how hard her heart was pounding. The storm still howled outside, but with one lie she had stepped onto another path, and so had Caleb. The cabin sat deep within a line of low trees, tucked beside a small creek swollen by rain. It was not built for guests. It was not built for two people to share. Caleb helped Lydia down from the horse slowly, almost with more care than necessary. When her foot touched the ground, pain shot through her ankle like fire. She gripped his hand by instinct, then released it at once, stepping back half a pace as if she had crossed an invisible line. "Careful," he said, low and without reproach. Inside, the cabin was dark and cold. Caleb lit the fire first, then seated Lydia in the only wooden chair with a back. He did not ask how long she had been hurt, why she was running, or who the man behind her was. That silence made Lydia tense. She was used to help always coming with conditions. Caleb brought warm water, set it beside her, then turned away to find bandages. When he knelt to examine her injury, Lydia held her breath. But his focus stayed on her swollen ankle, his hands steady, his movements clean, as if he had done this work countless times. "Does it hurt?" he asked, not looking up. "Yes," Lydia answered honestly. He nodded and eased his grip, adjusting the pressure to her reply. When he finished, he stood at once and stepped back to a clearly measured distance. "You should rest." Caleb spread a blanket near the fire for Lydia, then lay down on the opposite side of the cabin, far enough away to avoid any accidental touch. Lydia watched all of it in silence. The way he adjusted the blanket so it would not brush her leg, the way he handed her water and turned away, the way his eyes always stopped close but never crossed the line. Night fell quickly. Rain struck the wooden roof, wind slipping through the cracks with a low, hollow moan. Lydia lay listening to every sound, waiting for something familiar to happen. A question, a demand, a look that would change once darkness hid everything. Nothing happened. Caleb lay still on the other side, breathing evenly, though Lydia knew he was not asleep. Neither was she. "Caleb," she said softly, as if testing whether her voice still existed in that room. "Yes." He did not turn. "Why did you help me?" The silence stretched long enough that Lydia thought he would not answer. "Because you needed it," he said at last. Nothing more. Lydia turned her head toward him. Firelight caught half his face, the rest held by shadow, a face without curiosity, without any claim for gratitude. She turned back to the ceiling. For the first time in a long while, Lydia realized she was not straining to hear every small sound in defense. This quiet was not a trap. When sleep came, it was light, but not afraid. Sometime in the night, Lydia woke from the cold. She shifted, the blanket slipping from her shoulder. Before she could pull it back, Caleb was already on his feet. He laid another blanket over her, quick and precise, as if he did not want her fully awake. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded and returned to his place. Morning arrived slowly. Pale gray light slipped through the small window. Lydia woke with her first sensation being relief. She moved her ankle. The pain remained, but dulled. Caleb stood on the porch with his back to her, pouring water out. "You don't have to," Lydia began, then stopped. Caleb turned and handed her another cup of water. "You need to drink." Not an order, not pity. They ate in silence, hard bread, salted meat. Lydia noticed she did not need to explain why she ate slowly or why her hands shook. Caleb did not stare. and he did not pretend not to see. He let everything move at her pace. When she stood to try walking, Caleb was there at once, but he did not touch her until she gave a small nod. That simple permission made Lydia pause. The cabin was still unfamiliar. Caleb was still a man she did not yet understand. But Lydia began to realize something important, and it eased her chest. He was not trying to claim this space. He was not trying to claim her. Their first night under the same roof passed that way. No promises, no questions, only a distance made safe enough for someone once controlled to begin breathing on her own terms again. The second morning in the cabin began with the smell of wood smoke. Lydia woke first, a rarity after many months. Not from fear, but from the pale light slipping through the small window and settling on the opposite wall. She lay still for a moment, listening. No hurried footsteps, no commanding voice, only the faint wind on the porch and the steady crackle of fire. Caleb had been up for some time. She pushed herself upright, careful with her still aching ankle. On the wooden table sat a bowl of clean water and a piece of hard bread already broken into smaller portions. No note. None was needed. Lydia stepped outside. Caleb was splitting wood, his dark shirt damp with sweat despite the lingering cold. Hearing her, he paused and turned. "How's the ankle?" he asked. "Better than yesterday." "Good." That was all. No follow-up, no probing. They ate breakfast together. Lydia noticed herself beginning to register small things. The way Caleb slid the bowl closer when she couldn't quite reach. The way he angled his seat so the firelight wouldn't hit her face directly. The way he always waited for her to finish before standing to clean up. "Have you lived out here long?" Lydia asked, her voice careful, as if the question itself might cross a line. "A few years," he said, "not in one place." She nodded. She did not ask why. They repaired the porch at midday. Lydia sat on a chair, passing nails to Caleb. At times their hands brushed, barely. Each time both slowed for a breath, then continued as if nothing had happened. Still, Lydia noticed Caleb's gaze linger on her hands a moment longer than before, not inspecting, but remembering. When the sun stood overhead, Lydia spoke without planning to. "I used to live on a farm," she said, eyes on the creek. "Not a big one, but enough to be used to working before sunrise." Caleb didn't turn. He kept hammering, steady and even. "My father owed money," Lydia went on, her voice flatter than she expected. "More than he could repay. He said it was temporary, that things would work out." She paused, waiting for a question. None came. "I don't know when promises turn into chains," Lydia said. "Only that by the time I understood, I had no choices left." Caleb set the hammer down and turned to face her. He didn't ask the man's name, didn't ask what had happened. He only said, "You ran." Lydia nodded. Her throat tightened, not with pain, but with something unfamiliar. For the first time, someone had seen her action as courage, not betrayal. Evening fell. Caleb built the fire inside the cabin. Lydia sat nearby, feeling the warmth spread. She watched him work, each movement practiced, unhurried. This was a man who didn't need to prove who he was. "Why did you leave home?" Lydia asked, once the fire settled. Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Because I didn't want to become the man someone else decided for me." She turned toward him. "My father," he added, as if that explained everything. "He had plans for my whole life." Lydia didn't ask whether he left in anger or silence. didn't ask if they still spoke. She only said, "Then we're alike." Caleb looked at her, his gaze no longer distant like the first day. Not rushed either. It simply stayed. That night, Lydia slept deeply. No dreams, no jolting awake at the sound of wind. When she woke, daylight was full. A strange, gentle feeling settled over her. She had slept through. Caleb sat on the porch, sharpening a knife. When he noticed her, he looked up. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "Very peacefully," Lydia said, then paused, realizing she had shared something personal. Caleb only nodded. But the corner of his mouth lifted faintly, almost unnoticeable unless one looked closely. In a cabin never meant to hold two people, Lydia began to breathe more fully. Not because she believed she would be safe forever, but because for the first time in a long while, she was beside a man who did not need her whole story in order to respect her. And for Lydia, that was a beginning. The man appeared just before noon. Lydia saw him from the cabin window, a rider stopping by the creek, scanning the ground as if counting traces. Her heart tightened on instinct. She knew that look. It carried the same cold patience, the same certainty that a target would eventually surface. Caleb noticed the change in her breathing before she spoke. He stepped to the window, glanced once, then moved back. "Not him," he said quietly, "but someone asking questions." Lydia swallowed. "They're looking for me." "Yes." Caleb didn't seem surprised. He stood still for a moment, then said, "We'll go to the supply station. We can't stay here." Lydia nodded, her stomach tightening. Going out meant continuing the lie. This time it wouldn't be a single sentence spoken in a storm. Before they left the cabin, Caleb stopped her. "If anyone asks," he said evenly, "I'll speak first. You don't need to explain. But if they trust me." She looked at him, then nodded. On the road, Caleb spoke little. As they neared the station, he slowed the horse and turned to her. "One more thing," he said. "Don't stand too far from me." She frowned slightly. "Why?" "Because married people don't stand like strangers." Heat rose to Lydia's cheeks. "Then, what should I do?" Caleb hesitated. Then he held out his hand, not touching her yet. "Hold my hand when you need to." She looked at it. The calluses, the long, steady fingers. Lydia placed her hand in his. This time, not in a storm, not from pain or fear of falling, but as a conscious choice. His hand closed around hers, firm enough to be seen, gentle enough that she could pull away at any moment. The supply station was busier than Lydia expected. Laughter, clanging metal, the smell of hay and sweat. As they entered, a few eyes lingered. Lydia felt her pulse clearly, but Caleb did not release her hand. "Caleb Ward," a man called. "Been a while." Caleb nodded. "My wife." No name added, no long explanation. The man studied Lydia, his gaze lingering longer than polite. Caleb stepped half a pace forward, shielding her with his shoulder. A small movement, but Lydia felt the boundary it set. They stood together during the trade. Lydia noticed herself leaning toward Caleb without thinking. When someone asked a question, Caleb placed a light hand at her back, not pushing, not pulling, just enough to form a single outline. When an older woman asked Lydia where she lived, Caleb answered first. When Lydia spoke, he listened. He didn't correct her, didn't interrupt. But each time their eyes met, something shifted. On the way back, Lydia was still holding his hand. When she realized it, she startled and let go. "Sorry," she said quickly. Caleb didn't answer at once. He led the horse a little farther, then stopped. "You don't need to apologize," he said. "But if you're not comfortable—" "I wasn't pretending," Lydia cut in, then fell silent at her own words. Caleb turned to her. His eyes were darker now, deeper than before. "That's what makes it dangerous," he said slowly. "When the lie starts to feel like the truth." Lydia looked away, toward the open grassland. "I don't think I remember how to pretend anymore." Caleb drew a breath. "Neither do I." That evening, the cabin felt different. The distance remained. He still slept on the far side. But the silence was no longer neutral. It carried what had not been said. As Lydia pulled the blanket up, Caleb stood to adjust the fire. Light cut across his face, revealing tension in his jaw. "Caleb," Lydia said softly, "if this goes too far—" "We'll stop," he said at once, "before you feel pushed." She looked at him. "Aren't you afraid?" He met her gaze. For a long moment. "I am," he said. "Just not of you." That night, Lydia lay listening to light rain on the wooden roof. Sleep didn't come right away. In the dark, her hand still remembered the warmth of his. The lie had saved her from danger. But for the first time, Lydia understood it could carry them much farther, into a place where neither of them could turn back without paying a price. It began with a scar. Caleb was repairing the front step of the cabin when Lydia brought water out to him. The weather had softened after the rain. Late sunlight slanted through the trees, catching on droplets still clinging to the leaves. Caleb bent over his work, his sleeves pushed past his elbows. Lydia stopped. On his forearm, near the wrist, was an old scar. Not large, not raised, but clear. A thin line, long, like the trace of a deep cut once stitched in haste. Her heart struck so hard she had to set the bowl down on the wooden step. Caleb noticed the sudden stillness and looked up. "What is it?" Lydia didn't answer right away. She looked at the scar, then at his face, as if trying to fit together two memories that didn't belong to the same time. "That scar," she said slowly. "When did you get it?" Caleb followed her gaze and pulled his sleeve down by reflex. "A long time ago," he said. "About 6 or 7 years." "Where?" Lydia asked, her voice barely louder than the breeze. Caleb frowned slightly, not from reluctance but from unfamiliarity with having old marks noticed. "Near a river," he said. "Up north. I fell into the water. The current was stronger than I expected." Lydia sat down on the step without realizing when she moved. A cold sensation ran along her spine. Not fear, but something deeper rising. "Was anyone there?" she asked. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. Someone was. He looked toward the creek in front of the cabin, as if seeing through time. "I never saw her face," he said. "I only remember a hand pulling me out. A woman." Lydia closed her eyes. The memory surfaced clearly. An afternoon years ago, snowmelt swelling the river. A strange man dragged under by the current, thrown against rocks. Lydia had been younger then, thinner, but strong in the water. She hadn't thought. She had gone in. "I tore my shirt to bind his wound," Lydia said, her voice trembling though she did not cry. "He was bleeding badly. I had nothing else." Caleb turned fully toward her. His expression shifted. No longer the steady calm she knew, but something deeper breaking the surface. I kept that piece of cloth, he said slowly. For years. Lydia opened her eyes. You kept it? He nodded. I don't know why. I just couldn't throw it away. The silence between them stretched. No one spoke. No one needed further proof. The fragments of memory fit too precisely to deny. It was you, Lydia said, almost a whisper. Caleb took a deep breath. And you were the one who pulled me from the river. They looked at each other, stunned, not with loud surprise, but with the quiet certainty that comes when something vague becomes undeniable. I looked for you, Caleb said, his voice lower. Not right away, but later. I went back to that river many times. You didn't know my name, Lydia said. No, he admitted. Only that there was a woman who wouldn't let me die. Lydia let out a soft, broken laugh. I didn't know who you were either. She lowered her head, hands resting on her knees. I just thought it was the right thing to do. Caleb stepped closer. He didn't touch her, but the space between them had changed. Closer now, deliberate. Maybe, he said, we were part of each other's story long before we knew it. The words made Lydia look up. Their eyes met without the caution of before, only a slow, deep recognition. That evening, they ate in silence, but a different kind. Not silence to avoid, but silence to reorder the past. When Lydia lay down, she stared at the ceiling, her heart refusing to slow. She understood why she had trusted Caleb so quickly, why safety beside him had required no learning. Caleb lay on the far side of the cabin, eyes open in the dark. He thought of the river years ago, of the nameless hand pulling him free, of how fate could wait quietly, then place two people back where they belonged once the time was right. They had not truly met for the first time in the storm. It was only this time that both of them had survived long enough to recognize it. The pressure returned in the afternoon, when a stranger on horseback stopped on the dirt road in the distance. Lydia saw him first. She was standing inside the cabin, her hand resting on the window frame, and her body reacted before her thoughts could catch up. Caleb only needed one look at her face to understand. He's not coming here, he said quietly, but close enough to remind us they're still searching. Lydia nodded. Her stomach tightened. The quiet days they had just lived through did not erase the truth. The lie still carried a cost. They spoke little over supper. The fire burned low. Their shadows stretched long across the wooden wall, closer than usual. When night fell completely, rain began again, light and steady, as if the prairie itself were holding its breath. We can't stay here much longer, Caleb said after a while. Tomorrow, I'll take you farther south. And then what? Lydia asked. She didn't look at him. The question wasn't only about the road. Caleb was silent. For the first time, Lydia saw that he had no ready answer. I'm afraid, she said softly. Not of being caught, but that if I keep running, I'll keep living as if I don't have the right to choose. Caleb turned to her. Firelight cut across his face, sharpening the tension in his eyes. I don't want to be the one deciding for you, he said, and I don't want you staying because you think you owe me. Lydia lifted her gaze. Then what do you want? The question hung between them, unrushed, unavoided. I want you to stay, Caleb said at last, but only if it's your choice. No promises, no future sealed in words, only the present laid bare, honest and exposed. Lydia stepped closer, each step deliberate. She stopped in front of him, close enough to feel his breath brush her forehead. "I've been running my whole life," she said. "Tonight, I don't want to run anymore." Caleb didn't touch her right away. He lifted his hand and stopped mid-air, waiting for one last signal. Lydia gave a small nod. When his hand rested on her shoulder, it wasn't possession. It was presence. Steady, certain. A place she could lean into if she chose, or leave if she needed. Lydia rested her forehead against his chest. His heart beat slow and even. No urgency, no pressure. She closed her eyes and let the moment last longer than necessary. They sat beside the fire. No more words were needed. Darkness gathered around them, not to hide but to hold. Lydia realized she was being listened to through silence itself. The night moved slowly. No boundary was crossed in haste. Nothing was taken. Only old distances were set down, piece by piece, one hand finding the other, one breath falling into another rhythm. Lydia didn't remember when she drifted off, only that when she opened her eyes, it was still dark, and she wasn't afraid. An arm rested lightly around her shoulders, not holding tight, not trapping. Just there. "Caleb," she whispered. "Yes." "What are we doing?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "We're choosing." The answer made her smile in the dark. Not because everything was safe, but because for the first time, danger was no longer the only thing guiding her. When dawn crept softly at the window, Lydia woke to a different feeling. Not blind hope, but a quiet bond, built from small, honest choices. The lie had once saved her life. But that night, in a cabin never meant to hold two people, Lydia and Caleb stopped pretending, not because they had forgotten the danger, but because they were brave enough to stay, knowing exactly what it might cost. Morning arrived slowly, not the kind of dawn that bursts in with promise, just a pale light slipping through the cabin window, enough to mark the end of night and the beginning of a new day, a day unlike the ones before. Lydia woke first. She lay still, unmoving, listening to the familiar sounds of the cabin. Wood creaking with the shift in temperature, wind moving through the cracks, the steady rhythm of Caleb's breathing beside her. She was not afraid. That startled her more than anything else. Fear had always been the first thing to greet her when she opened her eyes. This morning, it did not come. In its place was a weight, solid and clear, like a decision waiting to be spoken aloud. Caleb woke as she sat up and pulled on her coat. He didn't ask anything right away. He simply looked at her, accustomed now to letting her speak when she was ready. "I don't want to run anymore," Lydia said. Her voice did not shake, but her fingers tightened on the edge of her coat. Caleb sat up straight. "Are you sure?" "No," she answered honestly. "But I am sure of one thing. If I keep hiding, I'll keep living inside other people's fear. His, my father's. The fear written into papers I never signed." Caleb nodded slowly. He didn't try to persuade her, didn't stop her. He asked only one question. "Do you want me to stand with you?" Lydia turned to him. The early light revealed the weariness at the corners of his eyes, but no hesitation. "I can't do this alone," she said. "But I don't want you there out of obligation." Caleb stood and pulled on his boots. "I'll be there because I choose to be." No other promises were spoken, but Lydia understood. That presence was not temporary. They left the cabin as the sun lifted above the horizon. The dirt road toward Cheyenne stretched long and empty. They spoke little. Each carried their own thoughts, but no longer in isolation. Along the way, Lydia revisited fragments of her past. The face of the man who had decided her fate with a single signature. The house she grew up in, but never truly belonged to. The times she had been looked at as property, priced, traded, transferred. Her heart beat faster when the first rooftops of town appeared. Cheyenne was crowded, loud, filled with watching eyes. This place had once frightened her more than the open prairie. Caleb dismounted first and offered his hand to help her down. The gesture was familiar, but this time it was different. Not to hide, not to perform, just to stand together. The courthouse sat at the end of the main street, a low, aging brick building, unimposing, yet to Lydia it weighed like a mountain. She stopped at the steps. "If I walk in there," she said softly, "everything will change." "Yes," Caleb said, "but however it changes, I won't step away." Lydia drew a deep breath. She stepped onto the first stair, then the second. Each step was the past trying to pull her back. This time it did not succeed. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick. Some people recognized her. Others whispered. Lydia felt their stares pressing against her shoulders, but they no longer made her shrink. Caleb stood right beside her, not shielding her from the world. Just there, close enough for her to know she was not alone. When asked her name, Lydia answered clearly. When asked about the contract, she told the truth. No evasion, no embellishment. At times her voice faltered. At times memory made her hands shake. But she did not fall silent. Caleb did not speak for her. He simply rested a hand on the back of the chair whenever she needed a moment to steady herself. That moment was not a victory, nor was it freedom yet. But it was the day Lydia stopped running. Not because the road ahead was safer, but because for the first time, she chose to face what lay before her. Her past, her fear, and her right to live a life decided by her own will. And Caleb, the man who could have turned away on that storm-filled night, was still there. Not to save her anymore, but to walk forward with her. The courtroom was full, not because of who Lydia was, but because her story had spread faster than she ever could. A woman who ran from a forced marriage, a stranger who claimed her as his wife, a contract signed in place of a life. Lydia entered with her back straight. She no longer lowered her head beneath curious eyes. Caleb walked beside her, not touching, but close enough for her to feel the steadiness of his presence. The judge was an older man, his voice low, his gaze practiced in looking directly at truths that were rarely pleasant. He opened the hearing not with severity, but with a calm that quieted the room. The man who had tried to claim Lydia sat across from them. He was neatly dressed, wearing the confidence of someone accustomed to giving orders. His lawyer presented a prepared account. Lydia had been promised to settle a debt. She ran. A horse was taken. Caleb was framed as a man who took advantage of the situation. Lydia listened without interrupting. She was used to other people telling her life in ways that served them. Then her name was called. She spoke slowly. No embellishment. No tears. Only the facts. She had never agreed, never signed, never been asked. She spoke of fear, of the night she fled, of knowing with certainty that if she were forced back, her life would end before it ever truly began. The room grew so quiet, the scratch of pen on paper could be heard. When the judge asked who had signed the contract in her place, Lydia turned. Her father rose, slowly. He looked older than she remembered. His shoulders slumped, his hands trembling slightly. Gone was the man who once believed he had the right to decide everything. "I signed it," he said, his voice rough. "I never asked my daughter. I owed money, and I was a coward." A murmur rippled through the room. "I told myself she would accept it," he continued, "that I was doing it for her future. That was the lie I used to keep living with myself." He looked at Lydia. He did not ask forgiveness. He only told the truth. She never agreed, and I knew it. No one in the room doubted that confession. The opposing lawyer tried to recover, but every argument weakened once its foundation had collapsed. Then Caleb was called. He spoke little. Only what concerned him. That he met Lydia in a storm. That he knew she was running from something real. That he lied at the transfer station not for gain, but because he could not turn away. "Did you know that could have led to charges against you?" the judge asked. "I did," Caleb said. "But I also knew that if I didn't do it, she would have had no other choice." The judge nodded, not in judgment, only acknowledgement. At that moment, the courtroom doors opened. A man entered, well-dressed, composed, his eyes cold and deliberate. No introduction was needed. The room knew who he was. Caleb's father. He took a seat in the front row, indifferent to the looks around him. When invited to speak, he stood, his voice firm and controlled. "My son has a habit of acting on conviction," he said, "but he is not a criminal, and if the court requires assurance of his character, I am here." No bowing, no pleading, just a man accustomed to standing upright before decisions, whether he agreed with them or not. His gaze passed over Lydia for a brief moment, not warm, but not contemptuous either. The hearing ended in heavy silence. As the judge rose to deliver a preliminary ruling, Lydia clenched her hands. She did not hope for victory, only for breath. And when the first words were spoken, clear, firm, she knew that this time justice had heard her. Not because she had been protected, but because she had stood up. They stepped out of the courthouse into the late afternoon light. There was no cheering, no sudden embrace like in the stories people later prefer to tell. Only the air felt lighter, as if an invisible rope had just been cut. Lydia stopped on the last step. She stood there and drew a deep breath, like someone surfacing after holding it underwater for far too long. "So it's over," she said, not to confirm it, but to believe she had heard it correctly. Caleb stood beside her, his gaze fixed ahead. "For him, maybe," he said. "For us, not yet." Lydia knew he was right. Freedom did not arrive like an open door. It was more like a new road, untouched, uncleared, with no promise of ease. They had not gone far when a voice stopped them. "Caleb." His father stood a few steps away. The crowd had thinned, leaving enough space for a confrontation that needed no witnesses. "You don't need to say anything," Caleb said first, his voice steady. "I know what you're going to say." The older man studied his son for a long moment. His eyes were not angry. They were cold, used to weighing outcomes rather than revealing feeling. "You've just cut off every path back," he said. "You understand that?" Caleb nodded. "I do." "For her?" His father glanced at Lydia, not with challenge, only assessment. "For me," Caleb corrected. "She's just the reason I finally saw it." Silence stretched between them. Wind moved down the street, carrying dust and the smell of horses. "You could have had everything," his father said. "Position, property, a life without lack." Caleb looked at Lydia, then back at his father. "I don't lack anything now." Lydia did not interrupt. She stood still, her hands clenched. She understood this was not a conversation she needed to win. Only one she needed to witness. His father gave a quiet, brief laugh. "You think freedom means standing outside of everything. One day you'll see. You'll understand the cost of this choice." "Maybe," Caleb said, "but it's a cost I'm willing to pay." The man looked at his son one last time. He did not say goodbye. He only turned and walked away, his back as straight as it had been when he entered the courtroom. Only after he disappeared into the crowd did Lydia release her breath. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "You didn't have to choose in front of him." Caleb turned to her. "I did." He took her hand, this time not for show, not because anyone was watching. "I don't want any doubt," he said. "Not for my father, not for the world, and not for myself." They did not stay long in Cheyenne. The town was too crowded, too full of newly stirred memories. The next morning they packed what little they owned, so little it fit in a single bag. Lydia looked back at the street one last time as they rode out. No bitterness, no regret. Just a chapter closed. The road leaving town was long and straight, grassland spread wide on either side, the sky opening without fences. "Where are we going?" Lydia asked. "North," Caleb said. "There's an old cabin, no comforts, but enough to begin." Lydia nodded. She did not ask more, not because she didn't care, but because for the first time the answer was no longer what mattered most. The horses moved at an even pace, setting a slow rhythm. Wind passed over them, carrying the scent of dry grass and earth. Freedom did not make Lydia lightheaded. It made her tired, like someone who had just set down a burden carried for too long. But within that weariness, something else took hold. A strange, steady feeling. The feeling of being chosen, not rescued, not permitted, but standing beside someone who had looked straight at the world and said, "I choose to be here." And though the road ahead held many unknowns, family, responsibility, shadows yet to fade, Lydia knew one thing with certainty. She was no longer running, and this time, she was not alone. Caleb left the cabin early. He rode out before the sun reached the ridge, leaving Lydia alone with the quiet morning and familiar chores. It wasn't the first time they had been apart for a few days, but this time, Lydia felt the absence clearly, not as loss, but as a space wide enough for something else to enter. She was on the porch when she heard hoofbeats. Not fast, not hurried. The steady rhythm of a man accustomed to commanding everything, even time itself. Lydia turned, her hands still streaked with soil. Caleb's father stopped his horse a few steps from the cabin. He dismounted slowly, standing straight, his gaze sweeping over the small house, the young garden, the fence Caleb had built with his own hands. "He's not here," Lydia said first. "I know," he replied. "I chose this moment." There was no request for permission, but neither was there intrusion, just a presence that could not be ignored. Lydia nodded. "Would you like some coffee?" He studied her for a long moment, as if weighing a move. Then he nodded. Inside, the cabin was unusually quiet. Everything was simple, nothing hidden, nothing apologetic. Lydia poured coffee and set two mismatched cups on the table. "Why are you here?" she asked, sitting across from him. "To understand," he said plainly, "and perhaps to correct a mistake." Lydia did not answer at once. She was used to powerful men claiming they wanted to understand. Most only wanted affirmation. "You don't understand Caleb," she said after a moment. "But you understand power, and you're losing it." His eyes darkened, but he did not argue. "I didn't come to take my son back," he said. "I came because I no longer have anyone to speak to as a human being." The words landed between them, heavy and bare, more than Lydia expected. "You're not lonely because Caleb left," she said quietly. "You're lonely because you never allowed anyone to stay." His hand tightened around the coffee cup, a small movement, but Lydia saw the tension beneath it. "My wife used to say that," he said, "before she died." Lydia looked at him, not with pity, but as one looks at someone who has lived too long in a room without windows. "Caleb didn't abandon you," she said. "He only refused to become the man you wanted him to be." He exhaled, slow and deep. "I know." They sat in silence for a long while. Neither rushed to fill it. Then he stood, reached into his coat, and placed a thick envelope on the table. "Land," he said. 200 acres around this area. Transferred. No conditions." Lydia did not touch the envelope. "You can't buy my silence," she said. "I'm not buying," he replied. "I'm giving. Because this is the only way I know not to destroy what my son is building." Lydia looked at the envelope again. She understood clearly this was not perfect atonement, but it was real effort. "Caleb won't accept it if there are conditions," she said. "I know," he answered. "That's why there are none." Lydia nodded. "I'll keep it, but not on your behalf. On ours." A faint smile crossed his face. For the first time, it held no calculation. "When he returns," he said, "tell him I came, and that I'm learning how to stay." Lydia stood as he went to the door. She didn't walk him out. She simply stood there, steady. When the hoofbeats faded, Lydia returned to the table and picked up the envelope. It was heavy, not only with land, but with meaning. Caleb came back 3 days later. She didn't speak at once. She only handed him the envelope. Caleb read for a long time. Then he looked up. "He came?" he asked. "Yes," Lydia said. "When you weren't here." Caleb gave a quiet smile. "He always chooses the hardest moment." Lydia placed her hand over his. But this time he didn't come to take. He came to leave something behind. Caleb looked around the cabin. The small house, the land waiting to be worked, the life unfinished but real. "Then," he said softly, "maybe this is the first time he hasn't used power to keep someone close." Lydia leaned into his shoulder. Outside, the wind moved across the prairie, carrying a new kind of quiet. Not because everything was resolved, but because something had finally been set down. Time did not arrive as a great turning point. It came through repeated mornings, sunlight touching the porch at the same angle, familiar footsteps on wooden floors, the smell of coffee spreading before anyone spoke. The land around the cabin changed slowly but steadily, not by miracle, by someone staying long enough to care for it. Caleb worked from before dawn. He built fences, patched roofs, raised a stable. His hands grew rough, his shoulders darkened by the sun. The work did not grow lighter with time. It only became familiar. And it was that familiarity that shaped a rhythm. Lydia spent more time in the kitchen at first, not because she was placed there, but because she chose it as a beginning. She cooked for those who came to help, the few nearby neighbors, travelers who needed a place to rest. Slowly, they stopped being strangers. When a child in the area needed help learning to read, Lydia agreed. Then another, then more. There was no sign, just a small room, a few wooden chairs, and a patient voice. People began to call Lydia by her name, not by her relationship, not as someone's wife. Just Lydia, the one who kept her word, the one who listened, the one who did not turn away when things became difficult. The ranch took shape that way, not through paperwork first, but through presence. Caleb did not inherit it. He built it. From rough boards, from days of hired labor to buy seed, from nights repairing stalls in cold wind, everything carried the mark of his hands. Caleb's father came by later, not often, not with orders. He stayed at the edge of the work, observing. When needed, he helped, quietly, efficiently. No one spoke of the past, but everyone knew it had been set down where it belonged. The change in him was not loud. It showed in how he stayed longer than planned, in how he asked Lydia about the lessons, in how he listened to his son talk about the season without correcting him. Lydia noticed it before Caleb did. Not because she was sharper, but because she was used to seeing the small fractures where people begin to change. A family formed without ceremony. It formed when Caleb automatically set out an extra chair at the table, when Lydia hung a smaller coat beside her own without explanation. When one evening they sat in silence, listening to the breathing of a new life inside the house they had built with their hands. Neither of them rushed to name it. But it was there, clear, needing no confirmation. The community arrived the same way. One neighbor left a sack of seed. Another brought news. During a harsh winter, they shared wood and food. No debts were written down, but everyone remembered. Lydia stood among them without feeling misplaced. She did not need to prove herself. Her presence, kept long enough, made her part of the land. One afternoon, Caleb stood looking out over the spread, the barns now solid, the garden rooted, the paths worn in by their own steps. "I used to think I walked away from everything," he said. "Now I see. I only left behind what was never mine." Lydia leaned against him. "And these things," she said softly, "we built. That's why they stay." Caleb's father heard it. He did not interrupt. He simply stood with his hand on the fence, looking at a life that did not carry his name, and did not need to. As the sun set, the light warmed the land. Lydia thought of the road she once fled, of the storm, of the lie that opened everything. This life did not come from a contract. It did not come from a signature. It came from days when people chose to stay, even when no one was watching. And in that moment, Lydia understood clearly. This was not a life given. This was a life built. Time arrived without announcement. It did not crash in or knock at the door. It simply accumulated, through familiar mornings, repeating seasons, and the quiet way people change without noticing until they measure themselves against old memories. They returned on a windless afternoon. The road leading to the old transfer station was less rough than before. The deep wagon ruts had softened, though the direction remained the same. Caleb stopped the horse at the edge of the low prairie, where years ago the rain had poured so hard the ground turned to mud. Lydia dismounted slowly. Her skirt brushed dry grass. Everything looked smaller than she remembered. or perhaps they had grown. "Here," Caleb said quietly. Lydia nodded. She stood still, looking out at the open ground, once the line between living and losing. She remembered the rain, the wind, the sharp pain in her ankle, and the fear that left her unable to think beyond the next breath. She remembered the question she had asked. Not a noble one, not brave in the way stories prefer. Just the question of someone with no choices left. "Do you remember?" Lydia asked. Caleb looked at her. His eyes were the same. Slow, deep, more used to listening than answering too quickly. "I remember," he said. "Every word." They stood side by side, without touching, without needing to prove closeness. The years had already done that work for them. "That day," Lydia said, "I thought if you refused, I would understand. I just didn't want to die alone." Caleb let out a breath, as if only now allowing himself to remember it fully. "And I," he said, "thought I should walk away. I'd spent my life avoiding anything that demanded responsibility." Lydia turned to him. "But you didn't." "No," Caleb said. "I stayed." A light wind moved through the grass, not like the storm years ago, just enough to remind them the land still breathed. Lydia bent and touched the ground. Her hands carried the marks of a life worked. Calluses, lines she no longer tried to hide. She felt no sorrow for them. They were proof. "I used to think," she said slowly, "that freedom meant running far away, never letting anyone hold me back." Caleb did not argue. "Now I know," she continued, "freedom is choosing to stay, even when it's hard, even when nothing is guaranteed." Caleb nodded. "Especially when nothing is guaranteed." They turned back toward the horses, but did not mount yet. Lydia looked to the horizon, where the afternoon light was fading into a familiar, muted gold. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. Answering that question? Caleb studied her for a long moment, then shook his head. "Not a single day," he said. "Not a single morning." He stepped closer and rested his hand on the saddle, an old, familiar gesture, like so many things he had done beside her over the years. "That question," he said, "didn't change everything because it was asked. It changed everything because we both lived by the answer." Lydia smiled, not wide, not dramatic, just the smile of someone who had walked far enough to know she was standing in the right place. They mounted and turned north, toward the home they had built, toward land marked by the footsteps of children and grandchildren, toward a place where lamps would be lit when evening came. Before they left, Lydia looked back once more. This place no longer held her. It was only the beginning, and the question from long ago no longer echoed as a plea for rescue. It had become a reminder that staying is not something that happens to us. It is something we choose. The circle is closed, but the story does not end. If this story has stirred an old memory, a hand once held in a hard moment, or simply a familiar feeling of quiet peace, please leave a few lines in the comments. Every story shared is a way we remind one another that we do not walk through this life alone. If you felt your heart soften, please press like to support the channel. And if you wish to continue walking with these slow, steady stories about family, about staying, and about the quiet choices that endure, please subscribe. Thank you for staying until the final lines.